She was my only friend in elementary school. I grew up with several undiagnosed mental illnesses that made it hard to socialize and be like other kids in general. This girl picked me out of the crowd somehow, and suddenly I had a best friend. She'd throw me under the bus constantly. People started rumors about me, and she'd laugh with them to my face, then act like nothing happened the next day. One time she began to push me for seemingly no reason, so I grabbed her hands to make her stop. She suddenly begins crying loudly, and everyone comes to her defense, including our teacher, who told me, "Why don't you back off? I think you did enough for today." I was kept alone in the classroom during lunchtime, and when everyone came back, there was a rumor that I had tried to choke her to death. I tried to tell everyone I just held onto her hands, but no one believed me, and in the middle of the crowd, she was there, not saying a word, taking in all the love and attention from the class. I somehow finally came to my senses. We were 8. She invited me for a sleepover at her place where we'd watch Pirates of the Caribbean, the third one I think, and just chill. At one point during the movie, she tells me I could rest my head on her if I felt tired. I did just that toward the middle end of the movie, and she shrugged me off of her. I asked her why she did that, and she said, "I never said you could put your head on me. If you do this again, I'll stab you." And I laughed awkwardly, thinking she was joking or something. She said, "I'm serious. There's a knife in the kitchen I stole from my mom. It's under the fridge. If you touch me again, I'll kill you." I kept silent until her mom sent us to bed. Curiosity got the best of me in the middle of the night, so I went to the kitchen to see if she was bluffing or not. Sure enough, there was a massive steak knife just under her fridge. I moved from my home country shortly after that, and I never saw her again. Last I know, she's been tweeting about her, quote, best friend in the world who went missing, and how much she misses me. Once again, enjoying all the attention from anyone who cares to give it. The scariest person I've ever met is actually a friend I have right now. He's only 19, but there's something seriously dark about him. One time we were in a parking lot with some of his friends, and this jerk yells at us from across the lot, just being a D-bag. I ignore him, whatever. But my friend gave him this look. I don't know how to explain it. It was like death incarnate. Like whatever thoughts he had became physical. I was seriously afraid. It wasn't just an angry look. It was literally murderous. Not too long after, he looked at me, in a really sort of way. It was like he looked through me. Boy, I felt weird. The thing is, I can now recognize that particular look. Not too long after that incident, I was watching a TV documentary about Chinese kids addicted to the internet and being put away in special camps. At one point, a boy is told to talk with his father about his feelings. Anyway, the boy gave him the exact same look as my friend did. I told my mom, who was sitting there watching with me, he wants to kill him. Sure enough, not a few moments later, he gets up and almost strangles his dad before people pull him off. My mom was shocked. I've seen actors try to pull it off. Nope, it cannot be replicated. Anyway, there's just something about my friend. He seems normal around other people and stuff, but if I try to talk to him one-on-one after he's been quiet for a bit, I just don't know. I try to avoid looking him in the eyes. It's just creepy. I get a feeling like there's a pressure in my chest, just warning me to run away. I once had a neighbor. He was abused physically, mentally, and possibly sexually by his parents. He was an absolute nightmare to live around. He had no sense of what was right and wrong, and loved to hurt people, an honest-to-God sadist. Not that he didn't come by it honestly, he was absolutely tormented. That being said, you might call the better part of our friendship normal. We did normal shit. Watched movies, played football, played Sega Genesis, but sometimes you'd just rub him the wrong way and he'd snap. I told him his mom was really loud when she yelled at us one time, and he walked away like he was mad. I didn't think much of it. I was walking back inside, and then all of a sudden I'm on the ground, bleeding all over the place. He had thrown a rather large rock at my head, and busted it open basically. I had to go to the hospital for stitches. I just told my mom that it was an accident. He got weirder. He liked to talk me and his sister into doing weird sexual things while he'd just watch. And if I tried to stop, he'd tell me to just keep going or threaten to beat me up. Keep in mind, we were only around 9 or 10 years old. This guy shot birds, squirrels, etc., all with his BB gun. He would keep the carcasses on his back porch, and I'm pretty sure he messed around with them too. The strangest thing I ever saw him do, I was on my porch with him and he asked me if I wanted to see something cool. I said sure. We walked across the street to a neighbor's house, and he jumped on the car hood and just started kicking in the windshield. It wouldn't bust, so we went to the neighbor's back porch and found a garden hoe and just destroyed this guy's car. The guy wasn't home, but a ton of people saw him do it. I jetted the moment he came back with a garden hoe. The cops came to his house, and I guess the guy had pressed charges. I think he was around 12 at the time, and he had to go through all kinds of legal shit for it. But they made him take the ride downtown and everything. And I remember so clearly looking out my window and seeing him going from his porch to the back of the cop car, just screaming his fucking head off. "My name is Drew, and my life sucks! My name is Drew, and my life sucks!" Just screaming it over and over. Even in the cop car, he was screaming as they rolled down the street. The last time I saw him was at a party, my senior year. He was beyond wasted, and he was already a few years out of high school. As stated in the last post about him, he committed suicide a few years ago. Very sad kid, but very fucking scary as well. One summer I worked at a camp which was located in a pretty isolated area. One of the people I worked with at the camp, I think in maintenance, was a kind of a loner type, who I guess at some point in the summer developed an interest in me. I was around 19 years old, and he had to have at least been 40. I thought he was harmless at first, and would kind of hang around me a bit, just try to chat me up and stuff. I figured it was normal coworker stuff, until one night he invited me to have a drink with him. Another older guy I worked with pulled me aside and warned me not to let myself be alone with the maintenance guy. I figured he meant that the maintenance guy was planning on putting, quote, moves on me. I cannot tell you just how clueless I was at that age. I was too embarrassed to ask for details, so I just decided to take his advice and keep my distance. I wasn't rude, but I just didn't stop and chat with him as I had before. Soon after, the maintenance guy came by my cabin late one night. I was sitting in the dark outside my cabin, just enjoying the evening, when I see him come out of the woods. He couldn't see me in the dark, but my cabin's porch light was on, so I could definitely see him. And I watched him slowly and silently circle all around my cabin, peering into all the knotholes and spaces between the boards and around the edges of the window coverings. It was bizarre for obvious reasons, but also because he had always been really friendly and lighthearted around me. But that night, I saw him in a different light. He looked dead serious, trying to make no noise, and had this intense look on his face that gave me the shivers. It didn't look like it was the first time he had done that either. I said something like, "Hey there, buddy, are you looking for me?" He jumped, and instantly he dropped the creepy face and turned back into the quote, nice and friendly version of him I'd seen all summer. He told me that he had been following a deer he thought he had seen in the woods, and quickly left. I just remember being creeped out, because I feel like I had caught the real him, what he was like when he thought no one was looking, and it did not look nice. After that, I moved to a cabin closer to other people, and stayed well the hell away from that guy. I found out years later that not long after that incident, he stabbed a girl to death in those woods. I had a classmate in second grade who had no fucking emotions. His name was Carl, and he was like an empty vessel. One day for show and tell, he brought in a cat skull and told the class it was his family's cat Peter. It smelled terrible, and the teacher flipped out and sent him to the office. I didn't see him for a few days after that. When he returned, he spent all day, every day, staring the teacher down. One day, he took his pen up to the desk and stabbed her right in the leg. He was immediately expelled. Never thought I'd see him again. Senior year in high school, we get a new kid. It's Carl. He's back. He didn't hang out with anyone. He stayed by himself during lunch. This girl Patty that I was talking to, trying to bang, kept getting followed home by him every day and would wait outside her house, across the street for hours, studying and taking pictures of her house. I started walking her home every day, and he would always be there. So one day, I asked what his fucking problem was. He just said, "You," and walked away. That night, he broke into Patty's house, but like a shithead didn't think to check if anyone was home. So Patty's dad stopped him almost immediately and called the cops. They found a ton of weird drugs and weapons on him, and like surgical equipment in his backpack. I never saw him again after that. I worked for many years at a prison residential work furlough program. We got mostly nonviolent offenders, except for the occasional involuntary manslaughter. That said, I met some real sociopaths who were only in for the crimes for which they were caught, not their real crimes. It's pretty scary to encounter one, and I got skilled at spotting them. One of our inmates was a woman who was actually quite famous for her crimes because of the length of her, quote, career, her charm, and her sheer audacity, especially now she's this sweet little old lady. There have been a couple documentaries about her, and a movie that I'm not sure is still in the works. Anyway, she's been painted as a folk hero with some of her victims, sort of flattered that she hit them, and some don't even press charges because of the publicity it brings them. When she arrived at our facility, she was treated like a queen by the other inmates, and had a few interviews with some local press. I tried to keep it contained, not because I had a problem with the press, but because everybody was a mark to this woman. She was so skilled at manipulation that she could practically get anyone to do anything for her. She kept asking me for special treatment, using the foot in the door technique. I wasn't buying it. She always had tons of cash, donations from her admirers, and would ask me to, quote, hold it for her. I refused. She would just laugh every time I told her no because she was sure that she could break me. She even said it right to my face. What she doesn't know is that I grew up with a sociopath sister myself, so I knew all the tricks. One day, she asked me for a very big favor, and I said no. Most people with her brand of sociopathy know when to cut bait and move on to the next mark. They don't hold grudges because they don't have room in their brains to think about anyone other than themselves. But this time, the look in her eyes chilled me to the bones. I don't rattle easily. I think my ADHD/ASD is protective for me that way, but I seriously thought at the time, this woman will gut me and not think twice about it. I've never been that scared before in my life, and I've seen some shit, y'all. I personally believe that there's some dead bodies in that woman's past. She's not just a thief. I've told this story before and people ask me about that look. Evil is the absence of humanity. It's empty and cold. That's what I saw in her eyes. Nothing. It was terrifying. When I was a missionary in Brazil, my companion and I were approached by a seemingly homeless man who greeted us in almost perfect English. It turns out that he was an American who had been living in Brazil for about 30 years. His name was Bickford, and he had to have been in his late 50s or 60s. It was hard to tell because of his big beard and very unkempt appearance. He feigns interest in what we were peddling and asked for a copy of the Book of Mormon, but is clearly more excited to be speaking English with two Americans. We met up with him a few times to discuss religion, but he would always meet us at the side of the road or some other public but still secluded place. We had to give weekly reports to the ecclesiastical leader for the local unit about who we were meeting and teaching. After meeting Bickford a few times, we bring him up in our weekly meeting. The bishop and his other leaders instantly know who we were talking about and cautioned us to stay away from that guy. Apparently, he's a bit unstable, and once or twice a year will start bothering the missionaries. My companion and I couldn't believe that the bishop was referring to the same person, and we continue meeting with him anyway. I don't know how to adequately describe the creepiness of this guy. Between his disheveled appearance, flat-out lying to us, and other small signs, he had a certain sinister vibe. But with nothing concrete to put our finger on, we continued to speak to him. Occasionally, he would, quote, run into us outside of the house we lived in. One night after talking about his house in the jungle and how nice and wonderful it was out there, he agrees to have us meet him at the side of the road in front of his house so he can guide us down the path to his house. The time arrives and we were waiting patiently by the side of the road, but Bickford is very late. Just as we're about to leave, he arrives and takes us down the path into the jungle. At this time, it's very dark, and we are walking through waist-high foliage. This area had roads and cities, but was right next to a large reservoir, and if you left the main roads, could become very isolated and overgrown very quickly. As we walked down this path for what seemed like forever, I kept walking into spider webs with my face and almost losing my shit. I hate spiders, and the ones in Brazil were the stuff of nightmares. Luckily, I carried a small LED flashlight, but it seemed woefully unpowered out there in the jungle. When we finally arrived at his house, my companion and I played it cool, but we couldn't believe what we were seeing. He had led us to a small clearing where there was a wooden cabin that had half collapsed on itself. He said, "Welcome home," and let us inside. There was no electricity, no running water, no utilities whatsoever. We walked in the front door frame. There was no door, and saw that all the furniture in the house had been destroyed. Literally, someone had concentrated a large amount of effort and time to achieve this level of destruction. Chairs were unrecognizable, and there was trash everywhere. He began showing us the main room inside the front door, and that's when I noticed them. Notes, in chalk, on every square inch of the wooden walls, up the walls, and on the ceiling, in a tiny, frenzied scrawl. When I trained my light on the notes and started to read them, shit got real. Most of the notes were variations on, quote, "Jesus will forgive me, but I have to stop." Quote, "I did it again." These were all with months and dates written next to them, and the piece de resistance, the names of several children, with their ages, and graphic sexual detail about them. We tried so hard to not mention the notes. We tried so hard to ask him small questions about the rotting food on the stove, or the 100 or so rats he kept in his basement. Anything but mentioning the notes. I can't speak for my companion, but I was freaking the fuck out. From glances at each other, I could see that he was at DEFCON 1 as well, and we decided to get the hell out of there. We made up some excuse as it was getting late, that we needed to get back home, and he reluctantly offered to show us the way back, on the condition that we would come visit again. As we get out of the house, he suddenly remembers that he knows a shortcut, and tells us to follow him. The direction he was trying to lead us was clearly not the way back to the road. It only led deeper into the jungle. We politely decline, and luckily we were able to follow the trail that we had originally made through the underbrush. This time, however, I didn't give a shit about the spiders. When we got back onto the road and realized we were safe, we looked at each other as if to say, did that really happen? Once we started talking about what we just saw, I was so terrified that I physically could not speak. Nothing like that had ever happened to me, nor since. I absolutely could not make a sound. I was that scared. My companion called our leaders, who called their leaders, and we ended up moving about a week later, but not before making an entry in our area book. This is the book that stays in the area, listing who had been talked to and who to contact in the area, warning all other missionaries to stay away from this guy. I worked in a behavioral management unit in a maximum security prison for a couple of years. It's a unit that houses borderline personality cases, sociopaths, psychopaths, etc. Basically a small unit to house the most disruptive inmates. We had an inmate who was in prison for burning down a building with a bunch of people in it due to selling his girlfriend some bad drugs. He killed at least one of them, I don't remember the particulars. This inmate was usually polite, courteous, hardworking, everything you'd want from an inmate. Hell, we'd watch Jeopardy most nights and I would be blown away by his ability to answer a massive majority of the answers correctly. Then suddenly, he wouldn't be okay. The most minor of things would just change him. He would shut down and become incredibly violent, and he was so strong. He looked forward to the violence, kind of like Captured in the Bronson movie. It happened intermittently, but when it did, he was a force to be reckoned with. We never had it out, but I was always aware that when I was speaking to him, it wasn't like I was going to have a normal conversation. It was like he had programmed responses that were designed to be exactly what I wanted to hear. Then there are the eyes. You hear the saying often inside the walls, nothing behind the eyes. He was the only one I ever really felt that for. His glare felt dangerous, and I can't really compare it to anything else I've ever experienced before or since. He made it through the program, eventually. The carrot that they dangled was a choice of what prison they would like to be transferred to. He chose one that had a particular staff member that crossed him too many times years and years back. He was going there to kill them. He waited years for the opportunity. Luckily, he slipped up and someone caught on before he could make it there. Without a doubt, the most dangerous person I've ever met. There's no doubt in my mind that if he had the opportunity and felt like he needed to, he wouldn't have hesitated to kill me. I'm so glad he'll never see the streets again.